Mike Lux is the co-founder of Democracy Partners and creator of the Soul of the Party Substack. And I really like what he writes. I want to talk to him about a couple of his most recent articles. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me on, John. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad that Chicago has some progressive talk.
Yes. We're very glad about it, too. I want to talk to you. I've talked to a couple of people in the last week or so who've referenced James Carville's most recent comment about how Democrats should just play dead and let, the worst of Trump happen and then somehow swoop in right before the midterms and make sure everyone knows that they're there to save them. I think that's a mistake, and I think you do too. Mike wrote an article. The problem with pretending to be dead is that you get killed sometimes. Talk about James Carville.
Well, and just to be clear, I'm not one of those folks who think James is terrible and on everything. James is an old friend of mine. We worked together on many campaigns over the years, and he's a good guy, and he's right about a lot of things. He's not right about this. We can't afford to play possum because we're dealing with fascists, and fascists. If you give in to fascists, if you don't resist fascists will bury you, and that is what Trump is trying to do. He's trying to bury us in this load of, I don't know if I can swear on your radio show.
Probably not. Bullpucky, maybe?
Yeah, there we go. He's literally trying to bury us, and we can't afford to in any way be passive. So that's one of my arguments with James. The other is this. In all of the focus groups that I was doing before the election and all of the polling that we were doing, what came through loud and clear is that what people don't like about Democrats more than any other thing is that they think of us as weak. They think of us as not fighting for them. Mm-hmm. And what they want is people who will fight for them. Most people are not living, as my mom might have put it back in the day, the life of Riley. Most people are not hanging out, enjoying the good life. They're going through a lot of tough things. Working class folks, especially, all those folks that Democrats have been losing in recent years. I mean, in one of our recent surveys, we found that we asked people a whole battery of questions about what they've been going through in their own lives. Have they they or a close immediate family member lost a job in recent years? Had they had their house foreclosed on in recent years? Had they lost their health coverage in recent years? Just a whole set of questions like that. And more than half of the people we surveyed answered yes to more than half of those questions. These folks are going through really tough times. And then you put on inflation on top of that. And that was a killer for folks on limited incomes who were already having trouble making it. And so they want someone who will go out there and fight the good fight for them. They want someone who will engage in the battle to make their lives better. And I'll just close that thought with this. When we would ask people in focus groups what they thought about Kamala Harris talking about how she would listen to anybody, she would talk to anybody, these working class folks would say, well, she's not going to be talking to me. She's not going to be coming to my neighborhood to talk. I'm sure she'll talk to, the Republicans in Washington. I'm sure she'll talk to, the various corporate lobbyists who are out there. It's great that she's friends with Liz Cheney, but who's going to fight for me? Who's going to talk to me? and people just found the whole notion of like just being nice to everybody in Washington, that they were not interested in that. They were interested in somebody who was going to fight for them. And then what they would say about Trump is a lot of these folks don't like Trump, but what they say is, at least he's a fighter. I mean, that phrase in focus groups would come up over and over again. Well, I don't like him in a whole lot of ways, but at least he goes out there and he fights. At least he goes out there and he battles. And maybe he'll battle on behalf of Americans. And so we need the last thing we need to do right now is play possum.
Yeah, I think you just hit on something that's very important, because I've been looking at the various articles, most of them in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, where they talk to people who voted for Trump and sort of what they're thinking now. And I remember seeing a quote from a young man who said, man, he's really doing things. Now, this young man obviously hasn't done a deep dive into the things that are being done and the harm that is going to be done. But I understood where he was coming from. And I think that's what part of what Trump was touting to his base last night. Like, look at me. Look at all the stuff. I mean, how many gazillions of executive orders have I signed? And we're firing people and we're locking up buildings and we're putting up buildings for sale. And before people start feeling the personal pain of those decisions, I could see where somebody who doesn't spend a lot of time diving past the surface of politics could say, man, whew, that guy, he's done, I heard one quote, he's done more in the first 2 weeks than most presidents do in 4 years.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, he has done a lot of stuff. Of course, all of it's bad. But you're absolutely right. For a regular person who's like, maybe they're working 2 jobs, maybe they're working 3 jobs. They're taking care of kids. They're taking care of aging parents and grandparents. They've got really busy lives, and they don't follow the ins and outs of politics. They don't follow each party's talking points or look at specific legislation or specific executive orders. But they know they want change. They don't like the establishment in Washington. They don't like the establishment, in big cities. They don't like the Wall Street guys. They don't like the big tech guys. And they feel like Trump at least is going to shake things up, that he's not going to be just like your regular old politician.
Well, then they really got what they wanted.
No, I mean that's what they were looking for, and they were. I have a colleague who describes it as this: these are folks who really just want to like flip the bird to the establishment, and they do want things shaken up. So that's an appealing kind of thing. Now, what you said, Joan, is exactly right. When they start feeling the pain, when they start seeing what's really happening and how it affects them, when they see that their grandmother that they're trying to take care of is going to be thrown out of the nursing home because Medicaid is being cut, when they see that same grandmother's not going to, suddenly her Social Security check isn't coming regularly because
or the 24-year-old woman profiled in the Washington Post who voted for Trump, and she works for the Park Service, and she no longer has a job with the Park Service. And it was that same thing. I didn't really like him. I really didn't want to vote for him. But, he said that he would make in vitro fertilization free. And, I'm trying to start a family, and it's not going well. Yeah. So I thought I'd basically take a chance that, I'd get free IVF.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And Trump said a whole lot of things, most of which were not true in any way, shape, or form. But he's a good salesman. He is good.
But Mike, this isn't our first go round with him. The people who think that he's for the working man, do they not remember that he made those same promises before he was elected the first time, and he didn't help the working man at all? I don't understand this. I get, people who aren't into politics like you and me, but I would at least expect people to have a certain amount of memory.
Well, there's a couple of things on that. One is that the people who really were focused on and realized what happened with Trump in the first term, they voted in 2020, but 19 million of them who voted in 2020 and voted for Biden in 2020 did not vote this time around.
Yes, and I want to talk to you. Those are the people, I understand, this Kamala did this, she didn't do that. Okay, fine. I want to talk about the people who stayed home. That's the group. I want to get into their collective heads. So, Mike, let's take our break right now so we can continue this discussion. Mike Lux, co-founder of Democracy Partners, and you can, on Substack, find him Soul of the Party. We'll be back with more after this. If you're one of the listeners in our audience, a financial planner, a CPA, maybe a divorce attorney, if you want to know why your mortgage professional hasn't returned your calls, it could be because they're out of business. More than 165,000 mortgage professionals have not renewed their licenses in the last 2 years. 165,000 people getting out of the business. So if you want to buy a new home or refinance the one you've got, do what I did. Call Team Hochberg. They really are our trusted local lender. Remember, in the last 2 years, while other companies have been shutting down, Team Hochberg has been adding loan officers. They're stronger than ever, and they would love to earn your business. Call them. You can get a free consultation. And I would strongly urge you to do that, to talk to them before you sign on the dotted line with anybody else. So that number to call, 855-563-2843, or go online, 56david.com. That number again, 855-563-2843, or 56david.com on your computer. Lower.com, equal housing lender, NMLS 1124061.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
With me is Mike Lux, co-founder of Democracy Partners, and you can read his Substack. It's called Soul of the Party. I rudely interrupted him as he was about to start to talk about the tens of millions of registered Democratic voters who sat on their hands and stayed home in the last presidential election. And that's the group that really, really puzzles me. Mike, what do you think about that?
Well, I think, again, these are folks who are, as we were talking about before, these are folks who are incredibly busy, incredibly preoccupied with their own family, their own work situation, and they need to be motivated. They need to be mobilized, and I think part of it is the structure of modern campaigns. It's become very tech-oriented as opposed to people-to-people oriented, and I think we don't do a good job of old-fashioned issue organizing. Like, you should turn out to vote because look at these issues. We send strangers to their doors or have strangers call them rather than people that they know, people from their neighborhood. So I think that's one issue. But I think the other thing was this was a tough economy for people, and I think the Biden-Harris administration got too excited about a lot of big picture economic numbers but inflation really hit people hard.
But these were Democrats. These were people who believe in freedoms and live and let live. And they knew what Donald Trump represented. Whether or not you believed that he was going to implement Project 2025, you knew he was a bad man and a bad president and treated the presidency like he was some kind of mob boss. I don't care if you thought Kamala Harris was the weakest Democrat you've ever come across. The weakest Democrat on their worst day is better than Donald Trump on his best day. How did they not act on that?
Well, I don't think most people are think of themselves as Democrats first or as progressives first, or think in those kinds of ideological terms. They know that their life, for the last 4 years had been tougher for them than it had in not in the COVID year, but in the first 3 years of Trump's term. Things were actually, okay for a lot of people. And because they weren't following all the details, they weren't following all the stuff, all the ridiculous stuff Trump was doing, they just weren't. 4 years later, 5 years later, they weren't thinking about it that much. They were thinking about how tough their lives were. Now, no, they did not change their vote. They didn't go enthusiastically or in any other way vote for Trump, but it just didn't become a priority to go vote him out again. And I think there's a lot of fault that can be laid.
Every Democrat worth their salt was sounding the alarm and saying this isn't just about Republican versus Democrat. This is about whether or not you believe in our form of government. That message just bounced off, didn't get through, wasn't paid attention to?
Well, I think part of remember, people are very cynical about politicians. And they've heard so many terrible things about politicians from other politicians. You think about, 50 years of negative TV ads, and they feel like politicians exaggerate everything, they overplay everything. And in fact, we were finding in focus groups people saying stuff like, well, the Democrats said Trump would do all these terrible things to democracy last time, and he didn't. We still had another election. We got a new president. They're exaggerating how bad he is, and because they're not following the details, they're not following all the horrible things that he said and did, and in fact they drown out one of the really sinister things that Trump has done is that he's made people turn away from the news. For people who followed the news, they voted for Harris overwhelmingly. But people less and less are following the news because it's so negative and it's so twisted, and people say so many ridiculous things, and I can't follow the news. And a lot of people were literally turning away from the news and not following those details. We have to do a better job of figuring out how to reach people where they are. We have to do a better job. For example, I'll give you one other example, social media. Most people these days, especially those under 40, get the lion's share of their news and information about issues on social media from their friends. And social media right now is dominated by a right-wing infrastructure that has invested tens of millions of dollars into it. And the disinformation coming out is enormous. And so people aren't getting good information. They're getting a whole bunch of puff pieces about Trump and all these horrible things about Biden and Harris. And that plays into it as well. Again, these folks, the people we're talking about, they're not going to vote for Trump. They're never going to vote for Trump. But whether they vote or not is the question. And they just weren't that motivated to vote in spite of Trump's first term.
Are you on social media to try to reach these younger voters? I know you're on Substack. Do you have a TikTok?
I don't have a TikTok yet. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, which has become terrible. I work with a network of folks who are on a lot of these different platforms, and am able to get out information that way to people. There's a lot of good people who are doing social media on our side. We need more people to do social media on our side. Mm-hmm. Everybody needs to engage in that. I think a lot of times progressive folks don't engage on social media because it's like, oh, there's too many people saying too many things on social media. I'm just not going to engage. But we need to get into those discussions. We need to be part of a community that engages with people and talks to people about issues. Otherwise, the right wing is just going to dominate that space.
There are some people who work for Courier Media, and Courier Media has also invested in a lot of radio stations, and they're using some of the new technology to simultaneously put their information out on other platforms. You can use something like a Restream or StreamYard, and when you post content, you can set it up so that it goes to Facebook, so that it goes to TikTok, so that it goes to YouTube. I really think that's the wave of the future for people who do progressive media.
Yeah, I agree with you. We need to be using those kinds of channels, those kinds of technologies, and I'm glad you mentioned Courier. Courier does a really good job of building out progressive media infrastructure, which we desperately need. Mm-hmm. We desperately need that.
Yes, we do.
We need progressive talk, not just in Chicago, but all over the country, in all those small towns, all over the country. But I'm so glad that shows like yours are out there.
Me too. For as long as I can last. Thanks,
well,
Mike.
Keep going.
Thank you, Mike. You too. Mike Lux is the co-founder of Democracy Partners.